Once again, a warm welcome to everybody. Welcome to NIE and to our online audience. Hope you can hear me loud and clear. All right, thank you. So we'll start without further ado. So welcome to this session. We have the privilege of having Prof. Marvin Berkowitz to come here with us. So he's conducting a series of online seminars, hybrid mode, as well as some workshops. So we thank you for attending today's seminar with us. Right. Without further ado, okay, we will pass the time over to Prof. Tan first. Professor Tan is our director of the Singapore Center for Character and Citizenship Education. All right. So warm welcome to Professor Tan, please.
The school leaders and also those online. Just on 5th August, we had a session with the school leaders, with the former Director General of Education, Mr. Wong. And I think some of you were there, and very glad to see you again, and many of you leaders, for the same topic on character and citizenship education. So as you know, NTU always hosts some of the best brains and best people in the world. Actually, at any one time in NTU, you probably will meet some very renowned professors, whether they be Nobel laureate and so on. We also have a Nobel laureate equivalent here, except that there wasn't a Nobel Prize for education, you see. But Professor Berkowitz is of that same standing, of the Nobel laureates of education. I will say more about him later on. But I just want to say that this area of character and SCCCE is so important. And I, like many people know, I always begin with a story. Yeah, I want to tell this little story. And it's a story from a town called Leningrad. I don't know how many of you will know Leningrad, but those who study world history will know that Leningrad is a town in Russia. And during the Second World War, it suffered very serious devastation from the attack led by Hitler. In fact, the town was so devastated that it took more than a decade to rebuild the town. And in the 50s, in the early 50s, right in this town, which was totally devastated, the people had to live in squatters. If you read the story, people had to fight for the use of a communal kitchen. People had to fight just to reach sources of water. And there was a boy born in 1952. The mother was a factory worker. He was raised by an abusive stepfather. And it was hard for him to survive in the neighborhood. Nevertheless, he grew up, didn't do very well in school. But because of the kind of lack of character modeling that he had in his home, he became a bully in school. Anyone whom he thought insulted him just a little bit. So the story goes, he would jump on that guy, punch the person, and try and pull out all his hair. And that boy was not good in his academic work, but he discovered he had some talent. He was a good fighter. Then he joined a judo club, and he was quite a judo champion. When he became a teenager, he finally decided to join the military, and he did actually quite well in the military service, and was selected to join an elite group in the military service, which is called the KGB. He then rose up to become quite a senior person. And in 1989, when the Berlin Wall was torn down, he was one of the most senior officers looking at the Berlin Wall. And when everything came crumbling down, he told his colleagues, we must rebuild the Soviet Union again. I think by now you know that Leningrad today is St. Petersburg. And the boy I'm talking to you about, his name is called Vladimir. This boy grew up In his teenage years, the writer wrote, he has no friends. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not that he has no friends. He actually has two friends. And these are the only two friends he trusted. One was called Conan, the other one was called Puffy. They were his dogs. You know, never before could we imagine that a lack in character can result in something very, very devastating. I have this little diagram which highlight the fact that it's so easy for humankind to forget the importance of character. You know, in the 1900s, we all know, 1900 straight away we think of the great industrialization, the Enlightenment, the great scientific advancement, and so on. By the 1920s, many of us remember the 1920s, especially in the Western society, they were called the Roaring Twenties. Why? Because for the first time, entertainment was proliferated at like the tipping point, you know, the transistor radio and not transistor yet, the radio and things like that. Entertainment became widespread, right? So people could enjoy entertainment at scale. So we had the Roaring Twenties. So the great scientific revolution immediately led to 20 years later, the Roaring Twenties, which were a great time of entertainment, music, and so on. I think anybody living in this period would think that, wow, the world is becoming a better place. Humanity is improving. But not long, because 20 years later, when we talk about the 1940s, immediately you ask people what is the 1940, and people will tell you about the wars, the Second World War. After the war, nobody wanted the war anymore, right? So when it came to the 1960s, it was a period of rebuilding. Even though people describe the 1960s as period of Cold War and so on, but actually people don't want war. Because if you read, there's so many interesting stories of the US Marines who would accidentally cross the Russian lines or Russian military accidentally crossing the US lines, and they'll be so careful, you know, to make sure that accidental war do not happen. So though it was Cold War, people were very conscious that we don't want war. We want peace. We want humanity. So in a way, you can say that the 60s to the 80s were a rebuilding. Then in the 80s, actually the 80s is a bit like the rolling, it's a bit like the 1900, because in the 80s, a great revolution happened. Just like during the industrialization, we discover the power of the steam engine. In the 80s, we discover a new power, which is the digital power. The genesis of the digital power began in the 1980s. I still remember, I was the teacher. We were all teachers in school in the 1980s. And then suddenly there was this personal computer. You know? It was like, wow, there is a computer. And then in the whole revolution of the world, nervous because 1999 was crossing to 2000 and everybody was worried. Y2K, will the computer system of the world collapse? Will the banking system collapse? Because no computer has crossed this digit before. And when it came 1st January, nothing happened. We all went into the rolling 2000, the rolling 2000, believing that from the 2000 onwards, mankind will have greater peace, everything will be better. 20 years later, sadly, 20 years later, 2020s, January 2020, I still remember. I just came back. And then there was a lockdown. We faced a world war against the COVID virus. But sadly, not long after, you also hear of a real war. I share this because things can change so quickly. Oh, it's not moving. This is St. Petersburg, Leningrad. I was just in St. Petersburg before the COVID, and we were in an institution called the Higher Economics Institution, and we were talking about creating a better society in Russia. But it was too late. Next slide, please. It was too late. You know, it was a little too late. COVID struck, and during COVID, even Sergio Crosso, you know, with Andreas Elisha and myself, we were talking about education. We were talking about a better education, a better humanity. And that was in 2020. What happened? Just less than 2 years while we were talking about Russia invaded Ukraine. Unthinkable. February 2022. Since then, if you read the report, the hundreds and hundreds of lives that have been destroyed through the action and command of one man. Yeah. Next slide. Singapore stands with Ukraine because we believe in upholding principles. We don't believe in the fact that any countries should be subjected to a larger power, right? And humanity should be properly respected. And so when Zelensky came to Singapore, we salute and honor his bravery and his courage to stand up for humanity. Let's next slide very quickly. Our president welcomed him. Next slide. And I admire their bravery. In the midst of the war, they actually ran a camp for about 50,000 teachers. They continue to want to bring education. But I didn't go to Ukraine. I didn't go to Ukraine, you know. So, but we did it online on talking about resilience in times like this. So I just want to say that, you know, we take a lot of things for granted in Singapore. Our founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew tells us that the aim of education is simple. Simple C. The first C is character. The second C is competence. But in our curriculum, it's very easy for us. We preoccupied with the competence part and often neglecting the character part. So very quickly, let's move further. I think I will just skip all this. So we know that every time we talk about teacher, we emphasize values first, right? So more recently, we realized that we really have to do this in a very serious way. Next slide, sorry. Yeah. Okay, next slide, last slide. Yeah. So one of the things that we always emphasize and something that we are still learning to do, and Professor Berkowitz really gave us a lot of insight on these things, that the curriculum is not just about what is written, the top learning curriculum, but most important, the modeling process and how you bring about the environment. And this is where school leaders, you play a very, very, very critical role. So in SCCCE, we are working on an attempt to try to advocate together with all of you the importance of CCE. We hope to talk more to you about this, but we have, of course, with us somebody who has been advising us when we were in the US. I must thank Berkowitz, his tremendous hospitality in helping us to see and learn some of the best school, right? And Professor Berkowitz will share with you what are some of the insight through his years of experience. Actually, I wanted to tell another story, which is that not around the period where in Leningrad, there was a guy called Putin at this end. Right in the US, there was another brilliant man that God has placed that is the total opposite, you know. And this is the guy who is telling us about character, about our being. And truly, it is our being that is most important. So I can say we are tremendously grateful for Berkowitz, Professor Berkowitz. Like I say, he's well renowned, his time and then he's all wanted all over the world, but we managed to get him here. And he's going to share with us some precious insight to further inspire us on really, you know, why character education is so important and really how do we do it as school leaders. So without further ado, let me welcome Professor.
Sorry. Hello. My understanding is that we've got about 30 people in the room. I can see that all by myself. But that we probably have about 200 other people out there who are school leaders, mostly school leaders who are out there. And that's a remarkable turnout, especially given that right now, apparently, the primary teachers have testing or something going on. I don't quite know the system, but there are a lot of other pulls on you. We've been finding in the US post-COVID, it's harder and harder to get the leaders out for professional development, not because they're not interested, but because one, they're burning out, they're just overwhelmed. And two, we are so short on teachers in the US right now because it's a tough profession that a lot of principals spend a lot of their time in classrooms teaching to students who are ill and couldn't come into work that day. So it's really hard to get them out there. So I'm doubly appreciative to know about all of you out there. It's a little odd teaching to a small group in here, knowing there are a lot of others out there, but I'll figure it out somehow. I'm Marvin Berkowitz, as you heard. I'm the Sanford McDonnell Professor of Character Education at the University of Missouri, St. Louis in the United States. I've had that position for about 25 years now, but I'm actually a developmental psychologist. My background is actually lifespan human development, but my focus has always been children and adolescents, and particularly how morality develops or doesn't develop in kids. So that nice story that Professor Tan just shared with you is the story of where it fails to develop. You know, you have somebody who has no social connections and is abused. That's a good recipe for destroying a person's character or morality. So don't have a lot of time, so I want to move forward and stop doing a lot of niceties and just get into the meat of the matter. So I'm going to talk to you today about the role and nature of school leaders, principals. You use the same term we do, other places, head teacher or the lead teacher, or headmaster, and so on. But we mean the person who is the hierarchical by position, the leader of the school, the top person, not the leadership team, not middle managers, but that number one person in the school. And but I want to start with just framing so you understand how I understand these concepts. So, and I'm going to do this very briefly. That's not what the topic is. So what is character education? And you'll hear more about my model in the book, but in that book, Prime for Character Education, I use the term nurturing the flourishing of human goodness. And in reality, character is a lot more than just moral character. There are other aspects of character, like civic and intellectual character and so on. But my focus, because of my background in moral psychology, that's really moral developmental psychology, is both my education in the first half of my career. Because of that, I focus on the moral part. Goodness, morality. How can we in schools nurture goodness that is potentially within every human being? How can we help them to be their best selves? We need to bring out the best children and adolescents. And for me, character education is doing that in educational contexts. Now, the model, the prime model says there are 6 broad design principles for how we accomplish, how we nurture the flourishing of human goodness. And by the way, all of these slides will be available. They're available. You can get the whole slide deck. It's going to, do we have a QR code at the end of this? Okay, there's a QR code. It'll give you that. There's probably a lot of other things in there too. I just don't remember, but I know I sent a lot of things ahead. So you don't need to try to copy down every slide or take a picture. So what we did essentially, and this is Dr. Melinda Beer, you'll hear more about her in a moment. She's the co-director of our Center for Character and Citizenship. She and I, 25 years ago, said, sorry, okay. Yeah, somebody, if everybody, make sure you have your microphones muted if you're online. That would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, so 25 years ago, we said, this is just a new field relatively. It's actually a reborn field. There was a heyday for character education, the first third of the 20th century in the United States, and it actually predates that, but there was a real growth of that. But the renaissance, the rebirth of character education started in the United States around 1992. So around 2000, Mindy Beer and I said, people are trying all sorts of new things here, but we're scientists. We want to know what's the scientific basis to this. What really works? So we started a project called What Works in Character Education, collected all the research, distilled it down, tried to reach conclusions and so on. I'm not going to go through that now. It's published, there's PDFs, there's all sorts of stuff, but we've updated it since then. But later on, I was asked to give a talk for the National Academies of Science, Medicine, and Engineering in Washington, D.C. And it was part of a big conference on character. And I was asked to do the paper on what is effective practice, what's evidence-based practice. So I went back to the What Works project and I looked at this massively long list of molecular implementation pedagogical strategies that we had found in all the research. And I realized if I walk into this audience and I put up this tiny letters with tons and tons of these, that's pointless. What good is that? I need a way to communicate this more effectively to practitioners. And that's when we came up with these design principles. Rather than specific implementation strategies, these are the 6 meta design principles. In the book, in the model, all of the specific implementation strategies are collected under them and explained, right? But the way to communicate this is through these. We use the anagram of primed as a mnemonic device, which for this audience, you will understand how as soon as I move past English-speaking countries, I'm now in trouble. As soon as I get into Asian countries where there's not an alphabet or the concept of an alphabet, I'm in even more trouble because an anagram doesn't mean anything. But in English, it's just a memory device. We're not going to talk about all this. We're going to talk about the first 2, and we're going to talk about them more towards the end of this talk. And that's why they're in red. I'm just going to highlight 2 of these as they fit with the role of the principal. Really, the principal is the architect or the conductor, also an audience of the whole thing. But I'm going to highlight those 2. So that's why they're in red. So you'll notice I keep slipping in Asian. Trying to suck up you and make it know how unlovable I am in general. Counterbalance it somehow. So this is not really yin and yang. It's just a way to talk about 2 things. That's okay. I'm willing to be that distorted. Then we need to think about our character comes down to 2 broad things: who you are and what you do. Okay, that sounds so simple. But when you start looking at what you actually do for character education, you may start to realize you're loading on the second one and really missing the first one. As an educator, who you are is way more important than what you do in terms of the impact on child development and character, particularly development. So that's an important thing to hang on. So character education for me is more a way of being than it is a way of doing. It's a quote from, I forgot who, Amy Johnson gave me this one. The only thing more important than right doing is right being. I don't have that one up here, but that's another way to think about this. And most notably, it's how you are with others. It's that interpersonal piece. When you go home and you're alone, you're at home alone, your impact on children's character becomes minimal. But as soon as you are interacting with others, either the kids themselves or even another adult in the presence of a child, now suddenly you are having an impact on that child's character. So the big question is, are you able and willing to change who you are, especially with others? And the reason we have Buddha up here is because my good friend Charles Elbot, who was one of these exemplary educators, educational thought leaders, led School of Brilliance, led a whole school district of brilliance, has written really nice work about theory and so on. He was a Buddhist. And it's an interesting path to him becoming a Buddhist. I'll just throw this in quickly because he likes stories. When Charles was in his teens, he was living in Germany because his father had some job in Germany, and he lived there for quite some time. But the family had bounced around the world for his father's job. That's when he discovered his father was a covert CIA operative. He didn't know that. They kept that from the kids by design at that point. And Charles became quite a rebel at this point and decided he was going to go explore the world on his own. And he got himself a job on some kind of big steamer ship that was going around Asia. And he just started getting exposed to Asia, and he got exposed to Buddhism, and he converted to Buddhism, and he was a Buddhist for the rest of his life. So he heard me say this. He said, "Marvin, that's Buddhism." I said, "Okay, that's cool. So here's your Buddha on the slide." For most educators, it's a new way of being. Should have changed it. I forgot to update this slide too. It's a new way of being. It starts in your mirror. Character education doesn't start with curriculum. It doesn't start in your classroom. It starts in your mirror. I've updated this now, so I have Confucius on the slide because it's self-knowledge. It's the virtue of self-understanding and self-knowledge, a Confucian virtue. And I don't think I have a quote here. Okay, oops. There's a wonderful quote by a great educational thought leader in the US, Paul Houston. He said, "Your schools are perfectly designed for the results they're getting. If you don't get the results, you need to redesign your schools. If you're a classroom teacher, your classroom is perfectly designed for the results you're getting. The only reason you're getting the behavior and the academic achievement you're getting is because that's what your classroom and school are designed for. And if you don't like the results, if you want to do better, the only option is to change the design of the classroom and schools. And institutional design starts in your mirror too. You have to change before the classroom and school will change. No classroom's changing if the teacher doesn't change. No school is changing if the principal doesn't change. I'm overstating the case clearly, but I'm trying to make a point. Picture, not this baby. This is so you saw the, I think you saw the SEC framework in your presentation. Notice leadership. It's in the outer ring of 5 sort of factors that influence the school, contextual factors. But I will argue that the leader has the single most powerful influence on school culture and ethos, that the leader has to invest in teacher professional development and learning. One of my former doc students created a whole model called the professional growth leader, which is a leader whose whole orientation is a servant leadership model, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And that her role is to invest in every adult in the building and their professional growth and to tailor it, customize to each of them, differentiated instruction for her staff. I would argue that the school leader is the one who empowers the teacher empowerment. So in fact, for most of these, school leadership's the entry point. And that's what I want to talk about today. I was ordered to. So, but I did it elegantly, until I commented on it and then I ruined it. But I'm gonna tell you a story. This is Manuel Maciel. He is a principal in a high school in Guadalajara, Mexico. Okay. And we started a project with a grant from the Templeton World Charity Foundation with his school and 5 other schools. These were tough schools. These were public urban schools in Mexico, very little resources. These kids are coming from fairly nasty environments, their homes, their communities. There was fighting and violence and poor academics and all sorts of stuff. In fact, Manuel's school was about to be closed when he was hired a few years before this project. He came in and he was charged to try to salvage the school if he could. And he did, but he did it in a very authoritarian way. He came as a dictator and just started cleaning things up. He was the new sheriff in town and he was cleaning up the town and so on. It got him a little bit, enough to keep the school open, but it didn't exactly make a great school. He entered our project and he learned some of the things you're about to hear. And they were anathema to what he had been socialized to be and do as a principal. His being as a principal, with more being than doing, was to be aloof, authoritarian, not relational at all, not have relationships with others. He was socialized not to have any relationships beyond the professional one with any of his staff. He was socialized never to speak to a student as the principal of school. And he said, this was common in Mexico. This is the way, at least in this context in Mexico. This is what he was trained to do. So suddenly comes into our project and we hit him right between the eyes with everything that's opposite to what he had been socialized into. And he wasn't real comfortable with this at first. And in this project, every principal wasn't in there alone. They had to form a character and leadership team for their school, and they went through our journey as a team. So now we had a team. These are his staff. He's not supposed to have a relationship with his staff, you know. At one point he decided, I don't know why he decided to take a chance. He invites the team over to his house for a meeting. You don't invite your staff to the house. That's having a relationship, right? Invites them over to his house for a meeting and serves them dinner. We don't serve them dinner. That's building a relationship. Okay. So he was doing this. Seems so simple to probably to most of you. This was radical stuff for him. And these folks saw, they understood this was radical, and they thought the clouds had parted, the sun was coming through, and a new day was dawning in their school. So they're suddenly emboldened. Now, back in school, they're now barging into his office to give him constructive, critical input on how the school could run better and how he could do better. Well, he didn't know what to do with all this stuff. To his credit, he didn't abort it and stop it and come down on it. He kind of was really uncomfortable, but didn't stop it. And at one point, he went up to one of the project directors in Guadalajara, and he looked at them and he said, if you do this again, you have to warn people, because these folks just come in there and they start criticizing you and all this, and we're not prepared for this stuff. I mean, he was blown away by it, but he rode the wave of what he had initiated. And his whole school changed for the better. Next thing you know, he's got relationships with the teachers, not just the team. And then after that, he's in the hallway all the time, just chatting up the kids, which to us, hopefully, is nothing astonishing. But for their culture, it was. He changed his way of being. And that changed the entire school. There's a poignant lesson in that one. Okay, so we have a model, and this is mostly Mindy Beer, since you can see it kind of, it's very tiny, but it's down on the bottom there. Remember, you can access all these slides. And I think one of her articles may be in the shared drive or something. I'm not sure. But years ago, Mindy, I was wired about school leadership. I've been running a leadership academy for principals for 25 years. And she was really on the fringes, helping to manage the center, doing some other work, but she wasn't involved in the leadership training and the leadership work. She had been a school teacher, never been an administrator, and she was a school teacher a long time ago. Right? And so she thought, all right, we need a new grant, we need some funding. And so she went to the John Templeton Foundation, who had been funding us before, and proposed just a pilot study to come up with a model of the virtues of servant leadership. Now, I had been loosely on servant leadership for years, but didn't really do anything systematic with it at all. Just would allude to it when I thought it was a good idea, no deep dive. She did a deep dive. And she ended up reviewing all the literature, meeting all the leaders and so on, and came up with a model of 8 virtues of servant leadership. These are the 8 virtues. These are ways of being of a principal or any leader for that matter. In fact, one of my friends probably 10 years ago, took over a leading character education organization in the US, which is a professional development organization, and he loves our work. And so he uses Primed and he uses this model as his morning meditation every day. But when he's confronting a challenge to work with a difficult colleague or benefactor or whatever, he says to himself, how can I be more relational? How can I be more empowering? How can I be more forgiving? How can I be more grateful? How can I do that? And it works for him all the time. So I'm going to go through these one at a time, so I don't need to linger on this slide. Yeah, okay. So you saw the P in Primed was prioritization. The prioritization, essentially means that the character and citizenship of students is a top, ideally the top priority of your school, of you as an educator. And as a leader, that this is your noble purpose, as Mindy calls it. And we actually do workshops for people to get them to explore and articulate, what's my noble purpose for education? This is Parker Palmer type stuff, and he says it. Our deepest goal is to grow into our own authentic selfhood, whether or not it conforms to some image of who we ought to be. We do so, we'll not only find the joy that every human being seeks, we'll also find a path of authentic service in the world. We need to do, as Confucius tells us to do, to go inside ourselves and know ourselves authentically and truly. For me, being an educator is more than a job and more than a profession. It is a calling. It's a calling to service. In this case, service to children and their learning and their development. When you call to service, it doesn't matter how much your salary is, it doesn't matter what your status is, it doesn't matter how annoying your job is, because you're there because you're called to serve these kids. And you're really fortunate in Singapore. The situation of educators in Singapore is better than in most places in the world. You have much more supports. You have the federal government behind you. You have high status in your society relative to teachers in most places in the world. You have better remuneration and pay than teachers in most places in the world. So you have a pretty good situation. Great professional development and all sorts of supports, technology. Nonetheless, you hit problems all the time. You got parents who are jerks and kids who are jerks and bosses who are jerks and curriculum that come out that they didn't quite get the bugs out of it. And you got to sit there and try to do something that doesn't quite work, and all you still have your challenges, right? But that's when you have to say to yourself, why am I doing this? What's my noble purpose? And remember it all the time. There we go. So what is noble purpose? And this is for a servant leader. The noble purpose to serve is a sense of purpose. It's a sense of, I'm putting two things together. The sense of purpose encapsulates your values, goals, identity. It's personal, it's internal, it's self-chosen. For the servant leader, the purpose is to serve both those one leads and the greater good. And that's a critical piece that most people don't recognize. Robert Greenleaf, who was the one who really rekindled servant leadership end of the last century, and usually the one people refer to, says this clearly, that you don't just serve the people you lead, but in the bigger picture, you're serving the greater good, particularly those who are disempowered. I am a servant. And he didn't mean this. He wasn't using religion for this. religions talk about this all the time, but he wasn't doing it from religious rhetoric or theology or philosophy. But it's certainly, different religions articulate it differently, but it's not an uncommon notion. Second one, humility. Now, humility is different than you probably think it is. Humility is not just knowing your limits, focusing on your flaws and your limitations. It's knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. And living your life according to your strengths and weaknesses. Leverage your strengths. Don't say, oh shucks, I couldn't do that. I'm no good at that. Everybody knows you are. And you're not serving people well because you're not leveraging your strengths, because you're being falsely humble, not authentic humility. Authentic humility is knowing accurately your strengths and your weaknesses. Again, this confusion, self-knowledge. But you have to be able to see your mistakes, admit your mistakes, accept the fact that you're imperfect. There's a Christian gospel line. I'm not even Christian, but I know this gospel line. I like it. Please be patient with me. God is not through with me yet. I always love that line. It's basically just saying, I'm a work in progress, folks. I am not perfect. There's not a one of us that is. And that's part of humility. But it's also openness. Because I'm incomplete, imperfect, I can benefit from looking at others, listening to others, learning from others. So the false arrogance of leaders is really problematic. And too many leaders often think that I have to pretend I know the answer to everything because I'm the leader. That's not humility. Humility is when you know something and you're good at it, you leverage it and use it. One of my favorite principals, I think she's probably the best primary principal I've ever met in my life, is Karen Smith, who retired many years ago after 41 years as an educator. And she was God's gift to primary schools. And they should have locked her up and never let her out because she was such an asset. I even told her that over and over. She kept wanting to retire. She's been, teaching for 30, 40 years. I'm educated for 30, 40 years. And I talk her out of it because I didn't want her ever to leave the schools. And when she finally sent me an email saying, Marvin, I finally submitted my retirement letter, I wrote back a one-word response by email. All I wrote was quitter. After 41 years, I just didn't want her to ever stop. She was so good. And she knew what she was good at. She was a marvelous instructional leader in a lot of the pedagogy of character education. If a teacher was struggling with developmental discipline, she could come in and model it for them or observe them and give feedback. If they were struggling on how to lead effective class meetings, she could come in and model a class meeting or watch and give constructive feedback. But she also knew what she didn't know. And she honestly would go to 5-year-olds for advice when she didn't know. She thought and learned that was true, but oftentimes they can give her good advice. And she didn't do it to play a game or to posture or to show other people. So she did it because she really believed these kids probably can give me some good advice on this. And she did that stuff all the time. That's the balance. Gratitude is a feeling of thankful appreciation for, acknowledgement of the good things one receives and the people who provide them. Other directed attitude. So what we found with school leaders is not that they're ingrates, that they're not grateful. It's that they never communicate their gratitude. They forget to tell people what they're grateful for. So we had one principal, actually I think it was a vice principal, Tyler, who had this epiphany when he learned about this. And so he was one who, it wasn't the only one, but in his school, he was one who would go into classrooms, do classroom observations, and give constructive critical feedback to teachers on their pedagogy. That was part of his job, something he did routinely. And he decided to add a new job to it, was the gratitude observations. He didn't call them that, didn't tell teachers, but he would also go into teachers' classrooms and give no critical feedback, only positive feedback, and tell them what he was grateful for. He didn't weave it in, he did it separately. There were times when the boss came into the classroom and all that happened afterwards was affirmation. How good does that feel? Other times he'd be in there and give constructive critical feedback, but sometimes it's just affirmation. He wanted to let people know he was grateful because he wasn't doing it. There are lots of ways to do it. Just send gratitude notes. There's a whole psychological literature now on the science of gratitude. Lots of good examples there. We're not getting into that now. Forgiveness, let's see, Nelson Mandela. You didn't know how colorful he was, did you? Forgiveness is the ability to give up one's antagonistic attitudes, anger, desire for revenge, so on, towards those who hurt us. It's the acceptance of human fallibility. Now, this is a really complex concept. One of my colleagues, Jonathan Terrell, who co-edits the Journal of Character Education with me, is a young up-and-coming scholar who's an expert in this. He just got back from Rwanda. We've been doing some amazing work on reconciliation and forgiveness and so on. But I don't have time nor the knowledge base to go into the nuances and details of this, but it is complicated. The key point for leaders is that many leaders spend a good part of their day angry at the people who are making their jobs harder. The parents who keep coming in with really stupid, uncooperative perspectives. The kids who are constantly in their office for the same darn thing over and over and dragging their time away from being a good school leader. The teachers who are resistors and then naysayers and then negative, Nellies, as we say, who no matter what your new initiative is, they go, oh no, that's stupid. I can't do that. I'm not doing it. That attitude. And you walk around angry all day. And what forgiveness tells us is all you're doing is trying to hurt the other person by stabbing yourself. Just poisoning yourself. It's like every time, you want to get even with this person for doing something, I'm going to drink a little poison. Great, and you keep the poison inside you. So forgiveness is a way it's really it's a gift to the self. That I am going to unburden myself of these negative feelings. It doesn't mean people still don't get consequences if they do something that's worthy of consequences. If somebody goes out and, rapes and murders somebody, you don't go, oh, it's okay, it's all right. No, they have to go to prison, they have to happen in the system to them. But it doesn't mean you should now walk around poisoning yourself every day and torturing yourself about it. You have to have a way to say to yourself, I need to unburden myself of this, the poison of resentment and anger and desire for revenge. Courage, willing to take justifiable risks, even in the face of fear. Not courageous if you're not afraid. I have a good friend in the United States Air Force Academy that used to do mountain rescue and firefighting. That's why I put the firefighter up there. And she wasn't afraid of anything. He'd go running into a fire, he'd go climb up the side of a mountain without a rope. He just wasn't afraid. So I always said, I wouldn't say Shane is courageous because there's no fear. It doesn't seem to bother him. I'm wired differently than the rest of us. He's a great guy, but you're open to hearing, learning, and perceiving the truth, especially when it's unpleasant or challenging. So, Renee Goodman, there's a principal, and she was in my leadership academy. One of the tasks in the leadership academy, it's a whole year-long process in their assignment. One of the assignments is to survey your staff about the adult culture in the school and about your leadership style. They're anonymous, you get them and you compile them. There's a lot more to this assignment than that, but that's the piece that's relevant here. Well, when she got the feedback, as most principals do, it's usually more negative than you think. Sometimes you're pleasantly surprised, but usually you have a rosier perception of how the teachers think about you and the adult culture and so on. It was far more negative than she had anticipated. And it was crushing. It was crushing. She was in tears, broken down in tears. And the next day, she went before her staff, shared the results with them, said, let's talk about it and figure out what to do to move forward. And I thought that was an act of courage. That was an act of courage. To admit this, she didn't have to show the results to the staff. But she wanted to move forward and was willing to do that. Knowing her own weakness and failures now, she was willing to move forward. Love that moment with Renee. Empowerment, motivation to enable others, to allow them to lead, encourage their development. Can you share the power? So we did a workshop the other day here on empowerment. And we heard the story of Manuel Maciel, where he thought he was supposed to be the dictator up on the top of the mountain and not have relationships, not talk to people and so on. In Asian societies, you have this whole hierarchical respect for elders, respect for seniority, respect for, all sorts of, stuff like that. And you're really not supposed to, criticize. You're not supposed to, give power to others. You're not supposed to try to take power away from someone who's above you. You're just supposed to be beholden to them. Oh, Professor Thomas here, and he's a famous guy, so you're gonna try to bow to him. If he says something really stupid, you still go, you really like it, yeah. That's part of what, a lot of what happens. When I go every year to Taiwan to run a week-long institute for a handful of school teams. And they drive me up a wall. I mean, I love the Taiwanese, I love going there, but the following drives me up a wall. Because I'll go into this, we're spending a whole week together, and I can't just lecture for a week. They've got it, we gotta have all sorts of interactive stuff and discussions. So I have this whole mixed pedagogy. But sometimes I'll just say to the group, has anybody in here ever had a case where such and such happens? Or is anybody here tell me an example of this? And I don't give up. So I'm cajoling and I'm waiting. Finally, one of the 6 principals will raise her hand and get up and make a speech. And while she's making a speech, her team, we sit there going, adoring their leader for standing up and being the best. And then even after that, the other 5 principals now all feel obliged to get up and speak also. And all that's done, maybe I'll get someone else to talk in the room. And I tell them at the beginning of the week, I've done this 9 years in a row. I know what's going to happen. Please don't do it to me again. It doesn't matter. It's going to happen again. So empowerment's a tough one culturally in a lot of Asian societies. I'm not going to redo my empowerment workshop in here now. Okay? But I will tell you fundamentally that voice as the metaphor for empowerment is a fundamental human psychological need. We know what happens when people are disempowered. We know what happens when they learn their illness. They become depressed, they get ill, they fail to thrive, they commit suicide. I mean, this is powerful stuff. We know what happens when we give people even the false belief of control in their own lives, including the elderly live longer. We prolong life this way. This is powerful stuff. So to say, well, it's a little uncomfortable in our culture to do it. I'm being a really annoying American. I know that, but I'm doing it on purpose. Okay. In our culture, we don't do that. It's uncomfortable. I don't care about your discomfort. I want to do what's healthy for human beings. And what's healthy for every kid, every teacher, and everyone else in the school is for them to have some share in the power in the school, for their voices to matter, for them to know their voices are welcome, to be co-authors and co-owners of the journey to excellence of the school, rather than to have it purely hierarchically handed down from above. Tough one, but it's important. Foresight or future-mindedness, it's basically a way to think over time. So it's backward looking in learning the lessons of the past. It's present looking, having a real clear sense of where we are now and what we're trying to accomplish, solve, improve. It's forward thinking and being able to project out from the past and the present what's our best path to where we want to get to. And not everybody thinks like this. There was a Kay Warner Shire was a German psychologist in the 60s, but my ability to place things in time is not great. And he came up with a model in which he said, Piaget's theory has 4 stages, and they end at the end of adolescence. But what about stages of adult thinking? Is there a constructivist way to talk about that? I don't think he fully pulled it off as a constructivist model, as logical structures like Piaget did. But he said in adulthood, one of the things that develops is the ability, two abilities. One, to take the perspective of the system. Bob Selman talks about that too in his theory of stages of perspective taking. But not just take the perspective of another person, but actually a whole system of my society, of my school, of the educational system in Singapore or whatever. Okay, take the perspective of the system, and also to think over time and monitor change over time. Well, that's a really necessary piece for somebody who's a leader of an institution. And foresight is analogous to that. Can you be a person with foresight? Can you always be thinking, here's where we were, here's where we are now, what's my best path forward, given where we were, where we are now, to get to where I want to be? Stewardship is a sense of responsibility or ownership. And I don't know if you use the same term, but in the US legally, we say that educators are in loco parentis, in the place of parents. And there's a legal obligation when a kid's in a school, and there's a medical crisis, a kid's in a medical crisis or something, you legally must act in place of a parent. Another way we talk about this relationship is that parents are entrusting their most precious possessions, we hope, to them the most precious, their children to you. And as principals, we're entrusting our schools to you. You're the CEO of the school. Our schools are critical institutions in our society and critical to take care of those most precious possessions of the parents, their children. And we want leaders who feel the responsibility of being a steward of that which was bequeathed to them and which they will then someday bequeath to others. Not just am I doing my job, but do I feel the responsibility to be the steward of this exalted institution of a school that's going to transform so many lives? Hopefully for the better, but maybe not, depending on how you do it. They're caretakers, and they're role models of doing it. It clearly transcends self-interest. So this takes me back to prioritization and relationships. You've now seen the 8 virtues of servant leadership. You've heard me haranguing you about the importance of leaders. And I will tell you, the folks here who have been working with me on and off for 10 years are sick of me saying this over and over and over. But I think you are in Singapore, you're under leveraging principles for character and citizenship education. I don't think we're socializing them well enough, training them well enough, charging them well enough, and so on. So much of it tends to go back to the middle managers and the teachers, that they're the ones who are the agents of this. Well, in one sense, they are. The single most powerful influence on a school in general and for character and citizenship education is the head principal of the school. Nicole is eventually going to finish her run here, working for the Ministry of Education and IE and so on, and go to being the principal. If you were a vice principal, now you're going to be a head principal. And so I keep focusing on her because I'm trying to influence her, because I know what an opportunity we have for somebody with this background to go in there and, as we say in Texas, where I live now, take the bull by the horns, and control it. I've been living in Texas for about 4 months. I'm a New Yorker, but I can pretend. But to really go in there and take the bull by the horns and say, here's my vision of the way we're going to go about this. We're going to do this together as a team. We're not wasting anybody's brains here. We're not pouring brains, and I need your ideas. I need you to help me shape, design things, implement things, assess things, and so on. Let's do this and authentically do it, not just say it. That's a chance. that's a opportunity. So prioritization says the school needs to make character education an authentic priority. So there's no one in the school who has more leverage in what's authentically the priority of the school than the principal. You need to briefly ask yourself about the noble purpose that we talked about. What really matters to you? Are kids in school fundamentally that learn skills and knowledge? Or are they there fundamentally become the kind of Singaporean citizens that Mr. Lee wanted in the boat rowing in the same direction? That was his quote. I don't know whose quote. Somebody's quote. We'll give him credit for it. He deserves it. But really, and that's a tough question to ask yourself. Amy Johnston, who I've mentioned a lot because she was one of my most stellar principals and then got her doctorate with me and now is internationally in demand as a speaker and trainer and so on. Just an amazing middle school principal and then, leader in character education, had taught me something she learned elsewhere, which is if you want to know what somebody's true priorities are, authentic priorities, look at two things: credit card statement and their daily planner. Because where their time and their money is what really matters to them. Ask yourselves as principals, how much money is in your budget for character and citizenship? How much do you allocate? If somebody comes to you and needs some piece of technology, some new textbooks or something, and someone else comes to you saying, I need the following so that we can improve our whole school character and citizenship approach, where does it go? So years ago when I came here, I learned, I don't know if it's still true, that at the end of every year back then, the Ministry of Education would have a surplus of funds. And then there'd be people would submit little grant proposals to, to get them. And I remember one year they were telling us, I think it was the Minister of Education was telling a story that, somebody came in and said, I need, I'll make up the number, $100,000 to do something in character education. And then somebody else came in and said, I need $100,000 for like new geography textbooks. And he said, no, character. We got to go with character. It's more important. And the money went to character. Maybe an apocryphal story. I don't know, but I was told it. And I use those examples all the time, all around the world. So you understand how much I esteem Singaporean education and the emphasis in character and citizenship. What am I pushing you? You may get the sense that I think you're a bunch of morally bankrupt degenerates. I don't. No, not even close. No, I don't. But I use the example of saying that for prioritization, maybe the next slide. Oh, there it is. Yeah, I'll skip that one. I made that point. The allocation of resources. I use that story. I just told you about allocation of resources. Rhetorical emphasis. And I was told was still true, but this was way back when I first started coming here. I was told the Ministry of Education never gave a single speech without prioritizing character in that speech. Every speech, and people actually chronicled this. They made sure. I don't know if that's still going on, not going on, but to me, that's the example I use of do you talk about it? Shared language. That's language can be false, but at least you have that. You talk about it. You allocate resources. The leader is the principal, the leader of character and citizenship in the school, or do they assign it to the middle managers and then the teachers? And we would hope that the principals in the school say, my most important job here is the socialization of good future Singaporean citizens. And if somebody here doesn't get algebra all that well, we tried. And this is somebody who's altruistic, honest, responsible, I'm okay. I'm okay. Or do you say, no, we got to cut back on character and citizenship because some of these kids are just not getting algebra? Because algebra is going to save Singapore. Algebra is a good contribution to Singapore. But if every Singaporean citizen can't do algebra, then you'll survive as a nation. You'll be okay if you got the rest of this stuff. Other parts of prioritization of school and classroom climate, really thinking sociologically. It is the principal's primary job to shape the adult culture in a school. There is no more important job. My friend Keith Marty, who's a brilliant educator, leader of a large, very successful school district, once said to me, Marvin, the problem with leader preparation in America, school leader preparation in America, is that we don't teach school leaders how to have difficult conversations with adults. Touche, we just nailed it. Because your job is not to teach the kids. The teachers will teach the kids. Your job is to create the kind of adult culture in schools that is the context for teacher excellence, student excellence. And we have to think about school-wide structures. What do we do? How do we structure our schools school-wide? I'm going to give you one example. I don't have the picture here, but Shelley Berman, a colleague of mine, retired superintendent of many school districts, large urban ones, small rural ones, all over the place. Also is the person who created an organization called Educators for Social Responsibility, because he's wired about making sure we educate our youth to be socially responsible. When he was the superintendent of the Hudson schools in Massachusetts, he had to build a new high school. The old high school was just not adequate. They were building a new one. He went out, hired architects who would work with him to design a school specifically for the promotion of social responsibility. The building was designed for that. It had pods all over for group work. It had maximal external access, so classrooms could get outside fast to go do projects and service projects and things like that. I don't remember the other parts of it, but he went that far. If your building is designed for something, that's about as school-wide as you can get. That's just an example. So leadership is key, as I said. We need the leaders who get it, know how to do it. Okay, I gotta stop soon. Invest in the character-focused professional development. We have to invest in the character-focused professional development of leaders. I don't think you do enough of that. Same thing. I haven't been inside this, but the little bit I can see is we spend a lot more time on educating teachers and middle managers on how to do character education, but not the leaders. And as I'm saying, you're the most important part of this as leaders. My best leaders, the ones I've worked with, I've got a lot of them now because I've been doing it for 25 years. And specifically focusing on, they are ones who are experts in this stuff. I'm less interested in whether or not secondary school principal can do calculus and knows, medieval poetry and has memorized the table of elements in chemistry. So I'm less interested in that. Do they understand how you nurture character and citizenship? These are I'm not going to go through these. These are a list of some of the initiatives we do to train leaders, but we don't have time. Talking about the resources, rhetoric, I jumped ahead. This is the language part, to have common language. We talked about this yesterday. Do you have core values? Why do you have? Why have core values? Can you name them and define them? Identify behavioral anchors for them. What does respect look like? What look like in this context, that context, between these people, and so on. Can you create a rubric? Levels of respect, levels of compassion, levels of whatever your words are. Can you integrate them into some coherent sense of character? It's taking it easy. Okay. And some of the structure. Character and so on. Are you willing to go there? You want to go that far? Well, you want to take time out of instructional classrooms for this. It's a real acid test. How much is it a priority? And then lastly, relationships is the R. I don't have to say much about relationships, but I do want to say these are the molecules and building blocks of good character. And this is really important point, academic success. There's a massive amount of research to show that we get more academic success when we have healthy relationships in schools. So it's serving both of them. Which also leads me to a point that character and academics are not working at cross purposes. It's not a zero-sum game. And in fact, there's tons of research to show that when you do high quality character ed, high quality social emotional learning, whatever you want to call it, you get an academic bump, you get an improvement in your academics. When you take time out of your master schedule and invest in character and SEL, you actually get increased academic achievement. And people say, well, how's that possible? Because they think it's a zero-sum game. They're thinking like Newton, Sir Isaac Newton. Yeah, we're in the age of relativity. Time's not finite. Time bends, morphs, and so on. If you're just doing some zero-sum game with time, you're way behind. You're sitting there under a tree waiting for an apple to fall on your head so you can figure out gravity. I know I lost you. Don't worry about it. So, relationships are critical from everybody. Whoops. Relationships need to be cultivated intentionally, strategically, inclusively. Every person who is in that building, whether it's the principal, a student, or the secretary or a cook, every one of them is part of this community. And we have to instruct intentionally and strategically build relationships amongst and across everybody, a network of relationships. And we have to be structural. We have to build structures like changing our class schedule, our master schedule. The adults, this is the part that where most leaders drop the ball, as I said. They have to cultivate the relationships amongst adults, and all the adults to them to all the adults to each other, before they can ever worry about the kids. I'm not doing all of that. I'm not doing that one. You could switch the word teacher here to educator, because it means principals too, and so on. And you could switch classroom to school, if you want to think about that way. This is one powerful quote. I've come to the frightening conclusion that I am a decisive element in the classroom, school. My personal approach creates the climate. My daily mood makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess a tremendous power to make a child's life miserable. Or as a principal, I possess a tremendous power to make a teacher's life miserable. It's really important. I can be a tool of torture, an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it's my response that decides whether crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a child or an adult humanized or dehumanized. When I taught at the U.S. Air Force Academy, we were trying to teach students, commissioned officers in the U.S. Air Force, and might someday have control over weapons of mass destruction. We knew if you had that kind of power, you damn well better have character. Educators have that awesome power over everybody's life in the school. I've been in a school where one teacher was a bully of every adult, including the principal in the school. I was astonished and aghast at that. Not doing that one. Just want you to invest in the character development of your staff. And I'm going to stop here because I want to do question and answer, and we don't have that much time left. So you have access to all this stuff, but that's my contact information. I think that was it. And then we have 2 letters left to talk about you and the name. So think quickly about what your questions are. If people are sending things online, are one of you monitoring the chat?
Yeah.
Hit me with your best shot. Fire away, as the song goes. What do you want to know? What do you want to tell me? What do you disagree with? Don't I understand about Singapore? Whatever. I don't care.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the sharing. I was thinking about the part about the relationships. I think in the school, we do have intentional and deliberate efforts to develop relationships between teachers and students. I was thinking about the part between staff, the part about the relationships. Do you have any advice to how to in a way not make it too structural, because sometimes when you make it too structural, people will think that hey, I'm just in this so that I am part of this community, but something more organic, such that staff. I think that when a good relationship is there, I think some of the classes you have teachers who talk more with each other. The students also get to benefit more because a lot of their sharing about how they are in the different contexts get shared very organically, but not only when something bad happens in the school.
Well,
Thank you so
there's
much.
a lot of this will depend upon the size of the school and the staff. Okay? So I've worked with little tiny schools where it's they don't have a leadership team because there are so few staff. They are the leadership team. I just worked with 2 schools in Taiwan where they had 8 staff in the whole school total, because they had 21 kids in the school, little mountain town. Okay. And so that's part of the answer is it will depend on that. I worked with schools with 200 staff. And the first place it starts is with the leader's modeling. If the leader models letting him or herself be known by the staff and then building relationships as much as is possible with the staff. So Julie Sperry was a middle school principal in a fairly small school in St. Louis, and she was gung-ho about character education. She was wired, and she hired a vice principal who also, Eileen Roberts, became wired about it. And they were trying to drag their teachers kicking and screaming into the wonderful world of character education. And they were kicking and screaming. They really weren't overly interested. And she was getting very frustrated. And finally, she came to me because I was her mentor. I said, Marvin, this stuff's not working. I said, yeah, I know. She said, well, what do? I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Stop doing character education. I said, what? She said, you know how hard it's been to get what little bit I've got in place? We're going to stop. I said, do you trust me, Julie? Yeah. Okay. Stop doing character education. What do I need to do instead? I said, first off, I want you to build a relationship with every teacher in the school. All I told her to do is, because it was a small school, small staff, go out to lunch once with every teacher. Just learn about their family and let them know about yours and have a good time and so on. Take them out to lunch and do that. What's the second thing? So you're going to be a servant leader. Well, what do you mean? This is before we had the servant leader model. I said, you're going to go up to every teacher in the school. You're going to ask them the following question, but you're going to mean it and you're going to act on it. The question is, what can I do to help you be the best teacher you can be? And then you're going to try to do what they need. Obviously, unless it was out of reason, unreasonable. A year later, she said, do that for a year, and then you're a golden. A year later, she started it. I think a year after that, they were recognized nationally for excellence in character, or 2 years later, or something like that. We had to get those relationships in place. Amy Johnson did something called, I don't even know what she called it. She just randomly made groups of, I think, 5 staff, something like that, but it was random. And they said, well, what are we supposed to do? And whatever you want. I'm just giving you a structure. If you want to use it, get together, go out, have a happy hour somewhere, go out for a meal. If you don't want to ever get together, don't. She didn't force it on anybody. You know, she offered every teacher in her school one time during the year where she'll cover one of their classes for them. Every teacher had one time in the year where they could have the lunch period and the adjacent class and actually go out and see a friend or go to a medical appointment or get their hair done or whatever they wanted to do. And she started building relationships with people by serving them. So there's I don't have time to do a lot more than that, but you don't need to make it some phony thing. You can also do fun stuff. One school I know did what they called the Run for the Roses. Every staff meeting, the principal would come in with a vase of like a dozen roses. And she'd say, I want to give this one to Nicole, because the other day I was at my wit's end and she bailed me out. And I just want to thank you. And Nicole would come up and she'd pick another rose out of there, or some, no, she'd get it. And whoever wanted to would run up there and grab a rose and say, do this for somebody else. Just little things to have fun together, know bits of information about each other. And that, like a crystal forms, it slowly gives you the building of relationships. Wish I had more time. I could go through a million of them, but gives you some sense of it. Another question? Thank you.
For our audience who are online, the Q&A function is enabled, so you can submit your questions. You can also unmute yourself to ask a question if you like.
They lied to me. They said you guys would have a million questions.
Take a while to warm up. We'll practice
But
with.
we have 5 more minutes. So if you want your questions answered, whoa, you better move.
So there's one question.
Yeah, this one.
One question from.
Okay. Oh, it's up there. Civic engagement when youth are on the rise, youth are. What's the connection with character and political engagement? Good question. I'm assuming people can see it or at home. The way we talk about civics and character is they're partially overlapping concepts. So part of being a good citizen is having certain aspects of character. There are citizenship virtues. The founding fathers in the US a long time ago, when they crafted the design for American way of governance, said the only way a self-governing society is going to work is if we have citizens who are participatory and virtuous. And those particular virtues, and there are lists of them, I'm not going to discuss them right now, but there are lists of specific virtues of citizenship. So we want character education to include the virtues of citizenship, which will lead one to be more concerned about social justice and having the courage and self-identity to act on them. Feel empowered to do so. There's your empowerment piece. If you've got kids in the school where it's very clear in the school that you only do what we tell you, you don't get to do what you want, then you're not going to get it. And that's part of character education, to empower all. So empowerment is part of this notion of social justice and activism, because I have to feel like it's okay for me to go out there and stand up and advocate for something that I believe is a social good. And I think the connection there is this sense of the virtues that are citizenship virtues, but have a moral component. That's the overlap. Plus, the last part of that is that I said earlier that I'm interested in the moral character of folks. But another aspect of character is civic character. And that's the stuff I'm talking about. And that's an important part of character education, to educate for civic character. Without civic character, you can't do that. My friend Joel Westheimer, who's one of the leading thinkers in this field, wrote a book called What Kind of Citizen? He talks about 3 levels of citizenship. And the first one is just that I'm obedient, law-following citizen. And the second one is that I'm participatory. I vote, I get involved in whatever things are obligated for citizens. And then the third one is where I try to make my society better. I'm an activist to make us even better than we are. Now, his model, clearly, somebody who has a moral compass, following that moral compass in a broad social way. There's social justice. You got any more? Anybody else?
Colleagues, may I invite the last question or a comment after you have heard Marvin talk about leading character? Do you have any thoughts? It can be a comment and may not be a question. Anyone? Someone?
That's a good question. Again, we want leaders who also look in the mirror and say, in our case, it's the virtues of servant leadership. It's not the only leadership model out there. There are plenty of models. You might want to use a different one. But to say, let me make that my mirror. Let me look at myself in that mirror. How do I stack up? And then engage in a proactive self-project of goal setting and personal improvement. Well, you can do that on your own in secret. And you can do that openly and transparently for your staff and model it for your staff. And you can even, when you do at the beginning of the year or the end of the year and have your consultation with each teacher and ask them, what are your pedagogical goals for next year? What are you going to try to improve? about your work as a teacher. You can also ask them, what are your character goals? What do you want to work on? Well, I'm not really patient with the kids who don't seem to be getting something after hearing it over and over and over. I need to be more patient and understanding of them. I'm going to work on that. And if you an explicit goal setting, self-monitoring project, you can ask your staff to do the same thing. So making that part of the way we are, remember, this is the way of being. The way we are now is open, honest, and self-improving people. That's changing the way of being. Can you imagine if every staff in a school honestly and sincerely said, this year I need to be better at being forgiving. This year I need to be better at being patient. This year I need to be better at that. And I'm going to systematically work at it and be public about it. So others know I'm struggling with this, they can help me. If every adult in the school did that, we'll end today with Dr. Seuss. Oh, the places you will go. Oh, the places you will go. So I urge all of you, especially those of you who are school leaders out there, to think deeply about a different way of being as a leader. For your sake, for the sake of your staff, for the sake of the kids, for the sake of Singapore, and because you're not in the people changing business, you are in the world changing business for the world. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, one of the character strengths was courage. Okay, and that's an important piece of this. And the other one, noble purpose. Well, I came up with something new I'm doing now with the folks that I train in this. I give them a little box with two gifts in it. There's a mirror and a compass. The mirror is to understand that your work starts by looking in the mirror and self-change, and the compass is your noble purpose. So when there's countervailing pressures, you have to say to yourself, what's my priority? Prioritization. What's my noble purpose? Remember that I'm called. Remember the quote about the power that you have, and you need to wield it responsibly. And have the courage to follow your North Star, to follow the compass. And if courage is something you need to work on, then you make it your self project. And I am going to try to be more courageous. Was there another one, or is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.